It's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right. Open up the door. Starts right now. So leading wide to heavenly gates and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and heard a sound behind him, and he said, "Behold, I looked, and there was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice. I heard a sound behind me, and there was a door, and I heard a voice. It was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place.'" That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this show is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discussing the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. What you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. And I want to welcome everybody from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. It's not a flat earth, folks. It's a spherical globe, and I stand by that because it's true. Oh, I can't even begin to go down that road right now, folks. I just can't. As it is, I already stumbled over my intro. Because I'm looking at the LED lights on the mixing board. I'm looking at to make sure I got something right on the cue over here on the computer. I'm making sure that the camera angle's right. And in the meantime, the broadcast is going, and I'm like scatterbrain all over the place. But anyway, welcome to today's broadcast. Hey, I am streaming live, by the way, over at my YouTube channel. If you go on over to, just look up Andy White, open up the doors if you've never been over there before. If you've never subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from. Join in the conversation over there. Introduce yourself. I just want to enlarge the family, enlarge the gathering. And if you are tuned in, and if you are streaming, enjoying the live stream, please share this into your streams, whether it be on Facebook or whether it be on MeWe or Gab or wherever you're hanging out these days. There's more and more platforms popping up as time goes on. But at any rate, please share this. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood here. And actually, it is. It's a gorgeous day out. This early summer day here on the east end of Long Island. Actually, I guess technically it's not really summer yet. But the past week, we've had summer-like weathers. In fact, it got so hot this past week. It really got very, very, very warm for an early June this past week. But today it's beautiful. Temperatures really dropped down. Nice breeze off the bay, cooling things down. Kind of I think the wind today was kind of like out of the east-southeast, and it was really just blowing in off the bay and off the ocean, cooling things down. Anyway, I just figured I'd give you a little bit of the scenery, the climate that's going on here on the east end of Long Island on this, I guess, more technically late spring day as opposed to early summer. When does summer start? I think technically summer, June 21st, I believe, is the actual beginning of summer. Anyway, I've got so much on my plate to get to. Don't I always say that? Of course I always say that. So much going on, as always. I want to talk to you today about the implosion of socialism. And you'll understand what I mean by that as the broadcast proceeds. But it was economist and philosopher Friedrich Hayek who once said, quote, "If socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialists." Oh, such a succinct and poignant statement of truth. Yes. Most of us, I think, especially in this audience, I think most of us are fully aware of the demonstrably historical truth that socialism has failed every time and in every place it's ever been tried. Doesn't matter to some of these people, though, because it seems that inconvenient truth still hasn't stopped those who are delusional and economically ignorant professors of that failed ideology from trying to foist their utopian fantasy upon the rest of us. No matter what the history of socialism is, no matter what the empirical evidence is, economically, historically, that it's failed, like I said, every time it's ever been tried in every place, they still try anyway. But be that as it may, I do think, personally, to some degree, I think that most of today's so-called socialists, the AOCs of the world, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world, the Bernie Sanders of the world, I don't think they really understand what socialism truly is, because they're certainly not living it. I mean, these self-proclaimed socialists are living high on the hog of capitalism. Bernie's got like 3 or 4 houses now. They all do. They're all, for all of their rhetoric on bashing capitalism, they sure like living high on the hog of it. I mean, take for example, and I'll be honest with you, I never even heard of this person, Nicole Sanchez, a.k.a. Nicoloo or something. I don't even know. I don't know who she is. But I came across this in my news feed. She's a content creator and Twitch streamer. I will be transparent. I don't even know what a content creator is. What's Twitch? Is that kind of like Twitter or something? I don't know. There's too many for them to keep up. Anyway, this little girl, and I'm going to call her a little girl because she's like in her 20s. I saw her picture. She looks like she looks like she's barely out of high school. But she gained fame. Whoever this Nicole Sanchez is, she gained fame apparently, even though I never heard of her. She's gaining fame now because I'm bringing it up. But she gained fame back in 2020 because she posted a video that apparently had 50 million hits on it because she was wearing a Bernie Sanders T-shirt. So tax the rich. And then in March of this year, Sanchez posted, according to this article, she posted the same video again, except this time she wore a T-shirt from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that said tax the rich. Okay? But in the video, she's showing off her brand new $2 million apartment. She's giving everybody a tour of her $2 million apartment. Oh, look at my new apartment. And she was showing off all this expensive and this lavish furniture. The apartment was filled with all this expensive stuff. So apparently this socialist wannabe, like I said, living high on the hog of capitalism, wearing shirts, tax the rich. But when she was confronted with her cognitive dissonance, when she was confronted with her blatant hypocrisy, she said this. This quote. Oh, it's so juicy. Oh, yes, indeed. Nicole Sanchez, when confronted about taxing the rich and redistributing that wealth, she said this. I've never even heard of, I don't know what she sounds like. I never heard her voice. But she said this. I think when people mean like tax the rich, I think at the end of the day, they do mean like billionaires and people that have insane, unfathomable amounts of wealth. You see, it's always a moving target with these people. I've said for years that socialism really is nothing but greed. It's covetousness and greed. It's wanting what you don't have, what your neighbor has, taking it and then saying you still don't have enough. So we want to make everything. But I'm digressing. But she says that tax the rich means billionaires. Well, it used to mean millionaires. And I got news for you, honey. I wish I could afford a $2 million apartment and say I wasn't rich. Again, it's utter. There's a disconnect. These people are phony socialists. I've often said that they don't even know what it is that they say that they are. I'm a democratic socialist. I'm woke. But actually, speaking of democratic socialists, have you noticed lately something I've been noticing? these people aren't calling themselves democratic socialists anymore. It seems like that term has sort of gotten kind of like swept under the rug. You know why? Because they're not calling themselves democratic socialists anymore, because now they're actually openly admitting that they're Marxists. The masks are off. The euphemisms are gone. But having said that, I think what they really do is they grab onto something that they believe and they think in their own minds sounds countercultural or anti-establishmentarian for the sake of their own fame, their own selfish agenda, their peer acceptance. I really don't think these people, they keep using this word. I don't think that word means what you think it means. And I'm going somewhere with this, folks, so hang out with me. Because regardless of what they're calling themselves, these neo-socialists really shouldn't even be called socialists, actually, because Marxism really is what they are embracing. Marxism really is what they are espousing. They're on that road. And like I said a moment ago, most of them are openly admitting it. Now, I said all that to get us to this point. Because this past week, we were treated to a real-time example of the hypocrisy of it all. It was put on full display. We got to observe the utter fraud and fail of an ideology that, when put to the test, utterly implodes upon itself. This past week, Daily Wire columnist Matt Walsh gave us an unintended illustrated sermon of the fraud and the hypocrisy of these so-called democratic socialists. It all began thusly. Let me give you a little background to the story here, because this is priceless, folks. It all began when about a week ago, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted out some pictures of her grandmother's, her abuela in Puerto Rico. She tweeted out some pictures of her grandmother's dilapidated or falling apart apartment or home that got wrecked from the hurricane a few years ago. And she tweeted this out. AOC tweeted this out, quote, "Just over a week ago, my abuela fell ill, and I went to Puerto Rico to see her, my first time in over a year, because of COVID. And this is her home." And she tweeted these pictures. And she said, "Hurricane Maria relief hasn't arrived. Trump blocked relief money for Puerto Rico." Actually, he really didn't. Or he stopped it. She lied. Even in her tweet, in trying to blame Trump for her grandmother's situation, she even lied about that. Because the reason Donald Trump stopped the relief for Puerto Rico was because they found out that the Puerto Rican government, the governor down there, it was full of corruption. Millions and millions of dollars were lost. They evaporated. Nobody knew where the money went. There was so much corruption. There was so much misallocation and misuse of the funds. Trump said, "We ain't going to send you any more money until you straighten out the corruption." So even in her tweet, she's again lying. So she says Trump blocked relief money for Puerto Rico. People are being forced to flee ancestral homes, and developers are taking them. Now, needless to say, AOC's tweet set off a Twitter storm of ridicule, rightfully so. Republican act. There was a whole freight train length of tweets blasting AOC on every level. But this one I really appreciated. Republican activist Laverne Spicer of Florida exoriated AOC with a tweet saying, "Honey, you drive a Tesla and have 2 apartments. If your grandmother is living poor, that's because you don't help her out. I'm surprised that a socialist like you wouldn't redistribute that wealth to her grandmother." Sad. Enter Matt Walsh. And this is where it gets really good. Matt Walsh tweeted out, "AOC went and bought herself a Tesla while her grandmother lives in a shack with a collapsing ceiling. It never fails with these champagne socialists. They expect everyone else to make sacrifices while making none themselves." Walsh went on to write in his tweet, "Shameful, AOC, that you live in luxury while allowing your own grandmother to suffer in these squalid conditions." And then the light bulbs go off in Brother Matt Walsh's head. And Matt had a wonderfully great idea. And it really was a wonderfully great idea. He basically said, let's show AOC and these fraudulent socialists how it's done. So Matt started a GoFundMe page to help AOC's grandmother, to help raise the funds to fix up her home. And Matt Walsh, in less than a day, raised over $100,000 to help fix AOC's grandmother's home in a day. Didn't have to wait for the government several years. Wasn't waiting for the doling out of the nanny state. Wasn't waiting for the doling out of the money. Wasn't blame shifting it. $100,000 came in from donors all over the United States. But then, quote unquote, air quotes for those of you on YouTube, someone in the family said they wouldn't accept the donations. So the GoFundMe campaign had to be shut down, and everyone's money was refunded to them. Could that someone have been AOC? Matt Walsh put out a statement updating everything that happened and transpired this past week. I want to read this to you. Matt wrote, "I sprung to action when AOC shared heartbreaking photos on Twitter of her grandmother's house that was impacted by Hurricane Maria in 2017. AOC, who earns over $180,000 per year and drives a luxury car, blamed Donald Trump for the dire state of her ancestral home in Puerto Rico. I wanted to help her Abula in Puerto Rico. So with the help, listen to this, with the help of over 3,000 supporters, including Ben Shapiro, a Jew, Michael Knowles, a Jew, Candace Owens, a black lady, David Moselle, I don't know what nationality it is, but I know he's a redheaded white guy. And I'm saying this for a reason, folks. I'm pointing out these people's ethnicity for a reason. So hang with me. But he goes on to list some of the donors, and he raised $110,000 in just a few hours to help AOC's grandmother, someone on the other side of the political aisle, someone who most of us don't hold with high regard. But her grandmother shouldn't be living in squalor. We can all agree to that. But he goes on to say, unfortunately, last night, this was the other night, GoFundMe informed us it suspended our campaign after AOC's family declined the aid. He goes on to say, I'm grateful for the outpouring of support for AOC's grandmother, even if AOC isn't. But questions remain, and they're good questions. Why didn't AOC help her own Abula? I'm not Spanish. Her grandmother. I'm just going to say grandmother. Why didn't AOC help her grandmother for nearly 4 years? Why did she turn down our help? I'm going to get into that in a moment. Does AOC only want government help? Why has she remained silent? All we can do is speculate. And folks, there you have it. An unintended, illustrated sermon by Matt Walsh. A real-life lesson between true benevolence and the malevolence of a victimhood ideology. Between the ability and freedom of individuals to act and freely contribute to actually help solving a problem, or for people to wallow in a pathetic state of self-pity, blame shifting, and a perpetual state of willful neediness. The contrast was laid out right in front of the world to see. AOC is a complete and total fraud. Now, we all know that, of course, but it's something to behold when it's played out right in the open for all to see. The politicization of her grandmother's situation and using her grandmother as a political prop blew up in her face. And Matt raised the question, why did she turn down our help? And why does she remain silent? I'll tell you why, folks. Let me give you my analysis. As my grandmother used to say to me, let me tell you something. AOC shut it down because it blew apart everything she believes in her specious worldview and ideology. It blew it apart. AOC shut it down because it was proof positive that Americans, number one, aren't racist. Whites, blacks, Jews, Hispanics donated to help her Puerto Rican grandmother. AOC shut it down because it destroyed the narrative of Americans being selfish, greedy capitalists that don't consider the poor. She showed herself to be exactly that, by the way. You see, folks, Americans are extremely generous when it comes to charitable giving. We've proven that throughout the decades. Americans are incredibly altruistic, incredibly philanthropic, incredibly generous when helping people in distress. And it's precisely because of America's Judeo-Christian roots and ethics that we are the most generous and responsive nation of people on the face of the earth. When tragedy and need strikes here at home and around the globe, we Americans jump into action time and time again, and we are second to none in freely giving. And socialists always falsely claim that capitalism and Americans leave behind the poor and needy. That's what you hear from them all the time. But it's exactly the opposite. It's not a question of helping the poor and those in need. That is the issue. As the phony justice, social justice warriors like to claim, it is their wrong-headed insistence that it is the government's job and that they should be both the arbiter and the administrator of my resources and my Christian responsibility. That is the issue. And as I said, it all blew apart. Everything she believes in her specious worldview and ideology, AOC shut it down because it blew apart everything she stands upon. You see, folks, and I'm going to go to a break in a moment, but in short, to sum it all up, Matt Walsh's fundraiser and the incredible response it drew, psychologically, ideologically, and morally speaking, it nuked AOC's belief system. That's why she shut it down. That's why she's been silent. This fundraiser, in effect, the way she viewed it, it was an existential threat to her. It blew her mind, I believe. And her own narcissistic selfishness was put on full public display for all to see. And she couldn't handle the free will contributions of truly benevolent and compassionate individuals. She would rather have the government confiscate the funds or have a grandmother live in squalor waiting for them. But she would rather have the government confiscate tax the rich, confiscatory taxation, rather than to allow the freedom of true benevolence and altruism. That's the difference between a Judeo-Christian ethic and godless socialism. That's the difference between socialism and a true Judeo-Christian worldview in a nutshell. And there is a fundamental distinction that is essential and crucial to understand, folks. This is where I'm going with this. It's the distinction between freely giving as a voluntary contribution or a confiscation by compulsion. Contribution or confiscation. It's as simple as that. See, both in the Bible as a whole and with Jesus' teaching in particular, caring for the poor and needy as well as a general altruism is an individualistic and personal virtue and responsibility. It was never meant for the government to do it. They can't do it. They're inefficient. The Bible tells us in 1 John, but whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? Now, someone might be, and I'm going to go to a break right now, but I want to close this first segment with this. Someone might be saying or thinking, why are you dumping on AOC so much? Why are you even bringing this up? I'll tell you why. Because she set herself up as the role model of progressivism. She's the poster child of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. She is old Bernie Sanders' young shining hope for selling the socialist agenda to the next generation. And the mask is off of this fake and phony compassion. And the mask needs to be torn off. Because we are in a cultural warfare. We are in a cultural warfare, a spiritual warfare, an ideological warfare. And this little episode proves that these people don't really want to solve problems. They want to use problems, to blame shift, play politics with, and make believe they care. But the only thing they care about is their own power and holding you under their thumb. This is the hypocrisy of leftist socialism in a nutshell, on full display for all to see. AOC has proven herself, in my opinion, to be a shameful human being in this whole episode. She's certainly a corrupt political hack. And she's an embarrassment. The people who voted for her, the people who put her into office and enabled her narcissistic and hypocritical lifestyle ought to be ashamed of themselves. Sadly, I doubt they are. After all, she is their representative. And folks, that is something to truly be concerned about. But I've got a lot more to say, so stick around. I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going to take a breather. Here's a tune called All Things New by Crossing Jordan. And I'm waiting for that day, as you are too, I'm sure, when Jesus comes back and makes all things new. Oh, Maranatha, come Lord Jesus. But stick around, folks. I'll be right back. Crossing Jordan, All Things New.
We lift our voices higher to you.
Crossing Jordan, All Things New. Local Christian band here on Long Island. They do the worship over at Heart of Worship Church over in Lindenhurst here on the island. Friends of mine, give a shout out to them. Praise God. Andy White, I am back after a short little musical break. Music are what feelings sound like, somebody once said. And you make all things new. I was thinking as that song was playing, going back to what I was sharing in the last block about, it's kind of really a sad situation with AOC's grandmother down there in Puerto Rico. Because with this fundraiser that Matt Walsh just tried to do this past week, she could have had all things new as far as, in a worldly sense, of course, in a material sense. She could have had a new home. There was enough money coming in, they could have probably fixed up the whole neighborhood. But no, it had to be politicized. It had to be shut down because of competing ideologies and not a coming together of real, true love and compassion despite the political divide. But that's where we are in this country, and it's a shame. It's a sad thing. It really is. Socialism in America, in my opinion, is on a self-destruct course. It will implode on its own the more it's put on display. Economically, it will collapse under its own weight the more they try and implement these socialist programs. Because that's its history. As I said at the top of the broadcast, it's failed every time it's been tried. The real question is how much destruction and harm will it cause before it self-destructs? See, socialism masquerades as fairness and compassion, but has nothing to do with fairness and compassion. It's only about confiscation and control. It is an ideology that believes you exist for the sake of the state, rather than the state existing for the sake of the people. And the more people, the more of us that they can make dependent on the government, the greater their power and control. I think it was made evident this week with this little episode. I'm calling it an illustrated sermon that occurred between Matt Walsh and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I think that's, again, it's about making people dependent on government for your power and your control and your lifestyle. Notice how I said a moment ago, before AOC came into government, she was a lower middle class bartender with a lot of college debt, from what I understand. Now she's living high on the hog. I don't want to digress too much with that. But I think this idea of controlling people, of making people dependent on the government, I think that's a primary motive for the Democrats' open border policies. I believe for some time now that the Democrats plan on having an open border and bringing in millions of illegal immigrants from Central and South America. But I believe in the long term it's going to backfire on them, my friends. Listen to me. I've been saying this for some time. Maybe in the short term it'll benefit them, but in the long term it's going to blow up in their faces, because these people, generally speaking, the Hispanics that are coming up from Central America, they are, generally speaking, they are pro-nuclear family. They are pro-capitalism. I know many of the small business people here on the east end of Long Island who have come from down south, who've become legal immigrants, and they've all started their own businesses. They may have come up voting Democrat, and I've watched it through the years, my friends. I'm not just talking blindly here. They started, when they first came, thinking the Democrats were their friends. Yeah, they voted Democrats. But the last year or two, they all started voting Republican, because they're pro-family. They're pro-capitalism. They don't want to be taxed into oblivion once they've started these new businesses. Yeah, they did come up here for a better life. They did come up here to work. They're good workers. They're pro-life. They're pro-traditional values. And at some point, I really believe the Democrats' master plan to gain all these supposedly new Democratic voters, given a long enough timeline, will turn into a major fail, I believe. The problem is how much time do we have left? I think this past week there was another example of a little bit of a glimmer of what I'm saying. Flipping the script, so to speak. A little town in Texas, McAllen, Texas. It's been a blue city. It's got an 85% Hispanic population. It had a Democratic mayor. It's just Democrat city. At least it was until this past week. This past week in McAllen, Texas, it officially flipped from blue to red as Republican Javier Villalobos defeated Democrat Veronica Whitaker by a narrow margin, but he won in a mayoral race. And the question is it a harbinger? Is this Texas border town with 85% Hispanic population, as it flips red, is it a harbinger of things to come? Possibly. Only time will tell. But the Republicans are certainly in jubilation. Governor Abbott said this, kind of reflecting on what I just shared a moment ago. Governor Abbott just said this, quote, Republicans and Hispanics in Texas share common values, and more Hispanics are voting Republican and getting elected as Republicans. They want to keep Texas red. Could be the sign. We don't know. But it could be a sign of the biggest red wave this nation has ever had. We'll see in the next congressional race. But like I said, I think this is going to implode on them in the long term. The question is just how much time we have. The guy who won this mayoral race in McAllen, Texas, Villalobos, he said he ran as a typical Republican. Quote, I campaigned on cutting expenses, work efficiently and effectively, but always work carefully to hold the line on taxes. He said Hispanics are rejecting socialism. Of course they would be. It's the very thing they're fleeing from down south. How stupid do you have to think that anyone who is immigrating to America from Venezuela or Guatemala or any of these places, especially Venezuela or Nicaragua or Brazil, how stupid do you have to think that anyone who's coming, who's fleeing from government tyranny, who's fleeing from socialism, you think they want to come here and have the same thing? They're fleeing a country where the government sucked up all the resources from the people who worked hard and earned the fruit of their labor. They're coming from countries like like Cuba and, like I said, in Venezuela and Mexico to escape things. And our modern Democratic Party wants to give them the same thing: high taxes and government control. And hey, let's bring in the Mexican drug cartels while we're at it. But that's a whole nother topic. How dumb do you have to be to think that you're going to promote those same ideas and policies here and expect to hold these people? Expect that these people will accept it. Of course, Hispanic voters are rejecting socialism. That shouldn't be a shock. They're fleeing it. Report just the other day, a news report in where was this? Epic Times. 10,864 Venezuelans pour into Texas border, up from 135 last year. Well, it's not that all of a sudden they wanted to leave. What's kind of sort of hidden in that headline is the fact that Trump's border policies were working. Last year, before Biden overturned all of Trump's border policies, before they stopped construction on the wall, before they opened up the borders, only 135 Venezuelans crossed illegally. In the 4 or 5 months that Joe Biden's in office, 10,864 Venezuelans have crossed the Texas border. From the article, let me read it. On any given day in Del Rio, Texas, hundreds of Venezuelans every day wade across the Rio Grande from Mexico into the United States. And they're carrying more belongings than illegal aliens from most other countries. Because you know who's fleeing Venezuela? The business people. Because Maduro destroyed the businesses. Maduro destroyed the economy. Socialism destroyed the country. So who's fleeing Venezuela? Or who wants to flee Venezuela? The people that were once upon a time well off. One woman who said she was a photographer back home was carrying her professional camera equipment in her backpack. The number of Venezuelans coming into the country is immense, and the surge has mainly occurred over the last few months, ever since the Biden administration, as I said a moment ago, overturned all of Trump's border policies. So this past week, Kamala Harris goes down to Guatemala to get to the root of the problem at our border. I heard a speech of hers yesterday, and she said, "Well, we got to get to the root of the problem and the root cause and the root of the." I'm not kidding. In about 3 minutes, she used the term root causes literally 10, 12 times, like every other phrase out of her mouth, but she never talked about the root causes. But the problem, here's the thing: when she got down there to Guatemala, the trip, her whole Central American trip, folks, was a disaster. To use the word of the day, it was a complete implosion. It was so bad that even I read a report today that the Biden administration, the White House, is like really upset how bad Kamala Harris did down in Guatemala. But she said she was going to go down there to get to the root of the problem. So she sits down with the Guatemalan president, Alejandro Giammattei, and Giammattei says, "You know what the root of the problem is? It's in D.C. It's not here in Guatemala." He said to Kamala, the reversal of Trump's, quote, safe third country policy has led to smugglers in Guatemala bringing kids illegally to the United States. The president of Guatemala told Kamala Harris, quote, "The message changed from the one administration to your administration. The message changed to, we're going to reunite families and we're going to reunite children." The very next day, the Coyotes were here organizing groups of children to take them to the United States. When Kamala Harris landed in Central America, she was met with signs: "Go home," "Persona non grata," "Trump won." I mean, it was hilarious in some ways. It was, I shouldn't say it was hilarious. It was sad, honestly. And these are the people that this administration thinks that they're winning over. No, they're not winning them over. As Ted Cruz poignantly tweeted out the other day, "You mean Biden's campaigning on amnesty and open borders and free health care for all illegal aliens? You mean that wasn't a good idea?" No kidding. And I got to go take a break again. But here's the thing, and I'm condensing it all. I stated a few minutes ago, on a long enough timeline, their policies, their socialism, their socialistic ideas, it's going to blow up in their faces. The question is, how much time do we actually have left? And is it already too late for some things? But stick around. I have to take another break. Here is Phil Wickham. The battle belongs to the Lord. And folks, that's exactly right. All these things that we're discussing, they're all in the Lord's hands. But it's fun discussing them, isn't it? Praise God. I'll be back in a minute. Phil Wickham.
When all I see is the battle.
The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM. WEGB 90.7, 93.3 in FE. WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Having a great time on an early summer day here on the east end of Long Island, bringing you integrity in broadcasting here from Faith FM. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I got a few minutes left. If you're just joining me, I am streaming live on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you never subscribed to before. Hit the subscription button, and there's a little notification button next to it as well. You'll be notified when we do go live for certain events like the weekly radio show as well as other things. We also upload our videos to Rumble. If you've never, if you don't like YouTube, if you want to boycott YouTube, I wouldn't blame you. But we are on Rumble as well. AJ White 777 over on Rumble, and we load these videos up over there as well. Something I forgot to mention at the top of the broadcast: if you are outside of the Faith FM broadcast area, the best way to listen to Faith FM is to download the free Faith FM app. You can get the app for free for your Android platform, for your Apple platform at the respective app stores, Google Play, Apple App Store. If you're outside of the broadcast area here on the east end of Long Island, I highly recommend the app so you can listen to great Christian programming 24/7 all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. Where are we time-wise here? I only got a few minutes left, and I've always got so many things I want to bring forth. But let me wrap up a little bit with this whole incident that Matt Walsh did with AOC this past week, because I've been using it as my springboard to share some thoughts, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. Like I said, it's an illustrated sermon. It's a powerful one if you look at it and you're paying attention. But Matt the other day tweeted out, he says it's pretty fascinating, really, and I agree. That's why I decided to do it. We raised enough to change her grandmother's life. We could have raised enough to lift her whole neighborhood out of poverty. But AOC shut it down. She'd rather leave people to suffer than accept help from us. It's a very revealing episode. And that's exactly true. And I've been trying to convey this idea, and I've done it throughout the years, the battle against socialism and the differences between socialism. I've done a lot of broadcasts on socialism. Now, it's not biblical. You know, I never mention it much, but if you'd like to read some of the articles I've written, some of the blogs I've written regarding the topic of socialism, is it Christian, is it not, is it biblical, is it not? Go on over to my blog site. I never mentioned my blog site, really. AJWhite777.wixsite, WIXSITE.com/OUTD. That's AJWhite777.wixsite.com/OUTD. It's my blog site. I really hardly ever mention it, as I said, but you can read the things I've written on socialism, as well as going through the archives on Open Up the Doors, where I have a bunch of videos. Because here's the thing I've been stressing for years. It's a difference between free will, contribution, and government confiscation. And people need to understand that, especially Christians who tend to think or want to think or deceived into thinking that socialism is somehow biblical when it's not. Paul writes, and I got to hurry along, I'm running out of time. But Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 9:7, quote, "Let each one give just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. The context of that verse in 2 Corinthians is precisely for the collecting of funds for the poor of another church whose members had suffered the devastation of an earthquake. I think the parallels are extraordinary, quite honestly, because the Bible never teaches benevolence by means of compulsion. The very idea is an oxymoron. And it is precisely this fundamental point that socialists, both secular and the so-called Christian left/progressives, fail to understand and grasp. But you need to know this fundamental difference between a voluntary contribution and a governmental confiscation through confiscatory taxation. Tax the rich, let's raise everybody's taxes. It's absolutely essential to understanding the difference, because between godless socialism, and that's what it is, godless socialism, and biblical altruism, it's a difference between night and day, morally speaking. You see, these people always take the moral high ground, these so-called socialists, but they don't have the moral high ground. They're actually in a moral swamp, actually. The moral virtue of sharing and benevolence is to be voluntarily exercised. Otherwise, there would be no virtue at all. The Bible never once, not in the law of Moses, not in any of Jesus' teachings, did Jesus ever mandate a governmental confiscatory policy of wealth redistribution or societal egalitarianism, which is what socialism is. But those are major tenets of Marxist ideology and of the Great Reset, by the way. And as I shared with you last week, the World Economic Forum, in cooperation with their Cyber Polygon project, are already preparing for the next global crisis, which they are predicting will be a major cyber attack to shut down the world economy. What does that got to do with everything else I've been saying? Connect the dots, because this is the prerequisite for the Great Reset. In order for a Great Reset to happen, a reboot, so to speak, you need to shut the system down in order to reboot it. It's what the Great Reset is all about. Overwhelming the system in order to shut the system down in order to reboot it. Except in their plans, when they reboot it, the operating system will change. They want to change from a capitalistic system to a Marxist system. And the Biden administration is completely 100% on board with the Great Reset and the whole Build Back Better agenda and mantra. So from their perspective, an implosion of the system is exactly what the doctor ordered. It all goes back to the Cloward and Piven strategy of overwhelming the system in order to collapse the system, in order to reboot the system. And folks, they've been planning this for decades. They've been teaching it in colleges for decades. And now they're in control. And now they have the technology and the consensus of the global elites to pull it off. At the very core of this globalist Marxist philosophy is a God-rejecting humanistic approach to world governance. A socialistic totalitarian imperialism will be the form of the government in the kingdom of the beast. This is what is taking place right now at this very moment. This is what they're pushing for. It's this democratic socialist movement, this Marxism. It's a fascist corporatism, as I said in the past. It's communism incognito. They want to avoid using those terms, knowing those terms elicit a negative response. So the terms they're using now are equity and stakeholder capitalism. But the Great Reset is nothing more than a repackaged and rebranded Marxism. It's a totalitarian technocracy. And I'm out of time, folks. I gotta go. I need to pick this up again. Thanks for tuning in. I had to cut it off there. I'm just out of time. But in the meantime, watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong, and let all that you do be done in love. I'll pick this up again next week, folks. God bless. Thank you for tuning in.